The curtain rose on Hollywood's golden age with the shimmer of champagne light, velvet drapes, and the illusion that stardom was as eternal as the stars above. On the silver screen, tuxedos and gowns spun dreams from the lives of ordinary men and women who believed the heavens had lowered themselves into their theatres. But behind that brilliance, far from the clapping hands and gasps of wonder, a quieter truth unfolded. Children were there too, though not as dreamers, only as witnesses. They were raised not in nurseries but in dressing rooms. They learned their first lullabies not from mothers' voices, but from the applause echoing through vast auditoriums. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. They were told to be grateful, to glow in the light of borrowed fame, but they knew the shadow of loneliness better than any spotlight. Some of Hollywood's brightest stars lived their darkest contradictions at home. The role made her famous. It also broke her. The studio loved a perfect family photograph, staged and polished, but no camera ever lingered long enough to see the fracture beneath the smile. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. A father admired by millions could be a stranger to the child waiting for him in an empty mansion. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. And so, a story emerges, not of cruelty, but of cost. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. The audience believed the kiss, but he'd already fallen out of love. Tonight, we wander through those silent corridors of stardom, where children became the silver screen's orphans, and ask softly, was fame worth the childhood's lost? Joan Crawford's name glimmered across theatre marquees like a crown forged from fire. She was the phoenix of Hollywood, a woman who sculpted herself from the raw clay of poverty into a goddess of glamour. On screen, she gave audiences resilience wrapped in silk, desire stitched into every glance, a vision of perfection no one dared doubt. But at home, perfection was not an act, it was a law. Her children remembered the rules more than they remembered the lullabies. Clothes folded with angles sharp as glass, beds so tightly made you could balance a coin on the sheets, voices measured, emotions ironed flat. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. In public, she was the devoted mother, her children polished like jewels for the flashing bulbs. In private, they were soldiers in an army where tenderness had no rank. Christina and Christopher lived not as cherished children, but as cast members in Joan's lifelong performance. The role made her famous. It also broke her. For every embrace she offered in front of a lens, there was a silence afterward that echoed longer than applause. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. And yet, if one looks closely, perhaps there is another truth. Perhaps within the iron grip was the trembling of a girl who had never been held gently herself. No one dared ask. She never told, until it was too late. She was cinema's steel rose, but her children learned that roses, no matter how radiant, can also wound. And so the story lingers. Was Joan Crawford's iron discipline cruelty, or the echo of a love she never received? Bing Crosby's voice was a cradle that rocked America through wars, winters, and weary nights. When he sang of Christmas, snow seemed softer, hearts seemed closer, and for a few minutes, the world believed in peace. His melodies were velvet blankets, wrapping millions in comfort. To the public, he was not just a singer, but a fatherly presence, a steady hand in turbulent times. But at home, silence reigned louder than any song. His children remembered the quiet, not as calm, but as judgment. Discipline fell like a conductor's baton, sharp, precise, unyielding. A wrong note, a misstep, was met not with kindness, but with the weight of disapproval. They clapped when he entered the room, but no one noticed when he left. For them, his music was not a lullaby, but a reminder of the tenderness He gave freely to strangers, yet held tightly from his own. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. The same man who crooned of joy demanded from his children a strength beyond their years. Praise was fleeting, punishment enduring. The role made him famous. It also broke him. And yet, listen closely. Beneath those songs of joy and longing lies a sorrow too deep to name. Perhaps Bing's voice was the father he wished he could become, the father his children only glimpsed when a melody slipped past his guard. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. No one dared ask. He never told, until it was too late. And so his house, filled with silence, leaves us wondering, was Bing Crosby's music a gift to the world, and an apology his children never truly heard? Judy Garland's life was stitched together like a ballad, luminous, trembling, and always on the edge of breaking. To the world, she was Dorothy, forever young, following the yellow brick road. She was the girl who promised there was a place somewhere over the rainbow. But for her children, rainbows often ended in shadows. Her daughters, Liza Minnelli and Lorna Luft, adored her. They adored the warmth that poured from her in those rare, steady moments. The mother who could make a kitchen feel like a stage, who could turn a lullaby into something holy. But they also learned, far too early, that love came tangled with worry. Makeup mirrors became their nightlights. Arguments backstage became their bedtime stories. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. Addiction followed her like a shadow too long to escape. Exhaustion sat beside her at the table, silent but unmovable. The role made her famous. It also broke her. For Liza and Lorna, childhood often meant stepping into roles no child should play. The caretaker, the comforter, the quiet anchor when their mother drifted away. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. Judy belonged not just to them, but to the millions who demanded her songs, her magic, her very soul. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. No one dared ask. She never told, until it was too late. Judy Garland sang for the world, but her children knew the truth. Stardust is beautiful, but it cannot hold when the strain becomes too heavy. Charlie Chaplin gave the world laughter without words. With a tilt of his bowler hat, a shuffle of his oversized shoes, he became the little tramp, fragile yet defiant, tender yet unbreakable. Audiences believed he was theirs, a companion who turned sorrow into comedy and hardship into charm. But in his own home, laughter often faded into waiting. Chaplin was a maestro of perfection. He directed, edited, acted, composed, shaping every frame of his films until they breathed his rhythm. His children, scattered across marriages and years, grew up orbiting a man who rarely stood still. They knew the warmth of his genius, but also the chill of his absence. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. To the public, Chaplin was lovable, universal, the tramp who belonged to everyone. To his children, he was a figure glimpsed between rehearsals, a shadow who disappeared behind editing reels and headlines. They clapped when he entered the room, but no one noticed when he left. And yet, even from afar, there was affection, letters, gestures, fragments of tenderness, as though fatherhood for Chaplin was written in brief scenes, never a full performance. The role made him famous. It also broke him. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. His children would grow with pride for who he was to the world, but with an ache for who he could have been to them. No one dared ask. He never told, until it was too late. Charlie Chaplin made the whole world smile, but sometimes even the greatest clown cannot hear the laughter at home. Errol Flynn strode through Hollywood like a man born from myth. With a blade in his hand and a grin that disarmed the world, he became the silver screen's eternal swashbuckler, the pirate who never lost, the lover who never faltered. He made millions believe in adventure. But fatherhood is not an adventure, it is an anchor. And Flynn was never meant to stay anchored. His children grew in the shadows of his headlines, the yachts, the romances, the whispered scandals that carried his name from coast to coast. To audiences, he was immortal youth, sailing through life without consequence. To his children, he was a father seen more in newspapers than in nurseries. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. There were moments, though, fleeting and golden, when he laughed with them, when he pulled them close with the same charm that could melt crowds. They clapped when he entered the room, but no one noticed when he left. The role made him famous. It also broke him. He was the pirate father, dazzling, untamed, and always chasing the next horizon. His children longed not for his adventures, but for his presence. They wanted stories whispered just to them, not told to the world. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. No one dared ask. He never told, until it was too late. Errol Flynn taught the world to believe in heroes, but his children knew the truth. Sometimes even heroes forget to come home. Clark Gable was called the King of Hollywood, and on screen he wore the crown well. He carried himself with the kind of authority that made audiences lean forward, a strength that felt unshakable, a masculinity that seemed carved in stone. In Gone with the Wind and Beyond, he gave the world the illusion of permanence, a man who could not be moved. But kings, no matter how admired, are often strangers in their own kingdoms. His daughter, Judy Lewis, grew up in a silence heavier than words. Born from his affair with Loretta Young, she was taught to believe in another story, one carefully crafted, a performance off-screen as meticulous as any script. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. For Judy, childhood was filled with half-truths, with a father who was everywhere and nowhere all at once. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. To the public, Gable was the man every woman wanted and every man admired. To his daughter, he was a ghost in plain sight. They clapped when he entered the room, but no one noticed when he left. The role made him famous. It also broke him. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. No one dared ask. He never told, until it was too late. Clark Gable may have been Hollywood's king, but his crown never touched his daughter's world. To her, he was not a monarch, only a missing father, a shadow where love should have stood. Bette Davis stood before the world with eyes like sharpened diamonds, fierce, unblinking, impossible to forget. Every role she played was a duel, a contest she refused to lose. On screen, she was brilliance incarnate, a woman who carved herself into legend with sheer force of will. At home, that same will could be both her daughter's shield and her storm. B.D. Hyman grew up in the orbit of a mother who demanded not just love, but excellence. Perfection was expected, resilience required. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. Their relationship was never still. It clashed like swords, each cut edged with both love and pain. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. Bette wanted strength for her daughter, but strength forged in fire often leaves scars. The role made her famous. It also broke her. To the world, Davis was untouchable, a force that bent cinema to her will. To her daughter, she was both the sun and the flame, the light that gave warmth and the heat that seared too close. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. And yet, beneath every quarrel lingered something fragile, something real. No one dared ask. She never told, until it was too late. Bette Davis left the world her art, unflinching and eternal. But her daughter knew another truth, that love, when bound too tightly with control, can feel like a battlefield no one truly wins. Spencer Tracy carried himself with a gravity that made audiences believe every word he spoke, every glance he gave. On screen he was steady, dependable, the embodiment of strength in quiet form. He seemed to belong to everyone, a figure of reassurance in uncertain times. Yet at home, his family knew a man far more fragile, a man weighed down by storms that no camera ever captured. His marriage bent under the weight of long absences, the demands of fame, and the shadows he carried inside. His children felt that distance, the silence that lingered heavier than anger. They remembered the glass more often than the laughter, the quiet withdrawal that came when his battles overwhelmed him. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt, and still, he loved them. There were moments of warmth, glimpses of tenderness that proved he cared. But his demons often spoke louder than his gentleness. They clapped when he entered the room, but no one noticed when he left. The role made him famous. It also broke him. To the world, he was strength incarnate. To his family, he was a man fighting shadows that would not relent. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. No one dared ask. He never told, until it was too late. Spencer Tracy's greatness on screen will never fade. But his children carried another legacy, of love touched by absence, of a father present in name, but often unreachable in soul. The Barrymores were Hollywood's first family, a dynasty of stage and screen. Ethel, Lionel, and John, their names were etched into the very bones of American theatre. And among them, John Barrymore shone brightest, a figure of elegance, wit, and reckless charm. On stage, he was magnetic, commanding, unforgettable. But at home, that same passion turned unruly, leaving cracks in the foundation of the family he built. His daughter, Diana Barrymore, grew up in the glow of a father the world adored, but in the shadow of a man she rarely had whole. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. His drinking became the ghost at every table, his absences louder than his presence. They clapped when he entered the room, but no one noticed when he left. Diana inherited more than his talent. She carried his chaos, his fragility, his hunger for approval that no stage could ever fill. The role made him famous. It also broke him. For her, childhood was not a steady script, but a series of rewrites, moments of hope undone by his decline. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. His legend glittered, but his daughter lived with the fragments. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. No one dared ask. He never told, until it was too late. John Barrymore was a king of the stage, but his dynasty fractured at home. Diana's childhood was not a crown, but an inheritance of sorrow wrapped in stardust. Marlon Brando did not merely act, he transformed the art itself. His performances burned with a raw honesty that reshaped cinema forever. On screen, he was electric, tender, dangerous, unforgettable. But in the quiet corners of family life, that honesty blurred. As a father, he was both present and unreachable, an island of contradictions. His children grew up in a world bent around his gravity. To some, he was gentle, playful, even tender in rare moments of stillness. To others, he was distant, restless, consumed by the causes and passions that pulled him far from home. His Tahitian paradise became both refuge and prison, a sanctuary for him, but not always for those who longed for his steadier love. The role made him immortal. It also made him untouchable. Fame cast its spell, and the man who once seemed so deeply human on screen often appeared abstract at home. His children remembered long silences, sudden departures, the weight of being tethered to a father the world claimed as its own. And yet, even in the absence, there was love, complicated, inconsistent, but undeniable. His brilliance, his empathy for the world's pain, his restless search for meaning, these too became their inheritance. Marlon Brando belonged everywhere and nowhere. His children carried both the light of his genius and the ache of his distance. For them, love was never simple. It was as vast and unpredictable as the ocean that surrounded his island home. Fame is a crown made of glass. When the lights strike it, it dazzles, refracting brilliance in every direction. But carried too long, it begins to cut, leaving wounds invisible to the audience, but felt deeply by those closest. The stories whispered tonight are not merely about Hollywood's golden age. They are about the human struggle that endures across every generation. How to love, how to nurture, how to be fully present when the world will not stop pulling you away. For Joan Crawford, perfection was a performance she demanded not just of herself, but of her children, and love became another role to inhabit, one that sometimes suffocated more than it soothed. For Bing Crosby, the silences between his songs weighed heavier than the music, filling his home with absence even as his voice filled every radio. Judy Garland, luminous and fragile, longed to pour love into her children, but what spilled out was often entangled with her own chaos. Charlie Chaplin, forever chasing the next stage, left his children waiting in the wings of his brilliance. Errol Flynn lived in a blaze of adventure that too often left his family standing in the smoke. Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood, found his crown could not protect his daughter from a loneliness as heavy as his fame. Bette Davis loved with ferocity, a devotion so fierce it sometimes wounded as much as it protected. Spencer Tracy, in his silence, became another kind of absence, one measured not in storms but in unspoken distance. John Barrymore, legendary and haunted, passed down both the glory of genius and the ache of grief. And Marlon Brando, magnetic and untethered, left his children navigating islands of distance, trying to reach a man who belonged as much to the world as to them. These stories are not indictments. They are reminders. Most parents, even the flawed and faltering, do not set out to wound. They give what they know, and what they know is so often only what was given to them. Applause in place of lullabies, discipline in place of tenderness, distance in place of presence. And yet, within their children, echoes remain. Sometimes they take the form of pain, a sharp inheritance that lingers long after the cameras fade. Sometimes they emerge as resilience, strength forged in the crucible of what was missing. Often they live as both, scars that carry within them the outlines of survival. Hollywood's legacy is not only written in film reels, marquees, and glittering awards. It also lives quietly in the untold stories of children raised in its shadow, children who bore both the glow of the spotlight and the chill of its darkness. As the credits fade tonight, let us hold to one truth. Stardom may burn bright, but brightness is not the same as warmth. The truest role we ever play is not the one rehearsed before an audience. It is the one whispered in bedtime stories, felt in embraces no one else will ever see, carried in the ordinary, unseen work of love. That is the role that endures long after the glass crown has shattered,